GM Growth Fam. I have finally got the man, the myth, the legend, Justin Vogel on my podcast. And I don't think this person needs an introduction. I think really, if today crypto marketing on Twitter is a thing, a huge part of that was Justin and Safary Club. And I've been following this man for a while. I've been inspired by his journey, his insights, obviously, all of the amazing things Safari has done over the past few years. And today is going to be a very different podcast because we're not going to talk about marketing with the marketer of marketers. We're actually going to talk about Justin's journey as a founder, building up Safari and his early journey. So, Justin, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm super excited to chat with you.
Now, when I looked at your career going from Princeton Middle Eastern Studies to working for a YC startup that was actually a hiring marketplace of sorts, I wanted to understand, having looked at what I like to call the game of life, almost, right? From so many different angles. You've looked at, spending time in the Middle East, working for a YC startup in the hiring marketplace space, and now into Safari. I really wanted to understand, what was the initial vision for Safari, first of all, because I know you were sort of iterating on building a marketplace and then you ended up on Safari. Two, why did Web3 feel natural to you? And were some of those early experiences in your life also an insight for you to come and build in crypto? And then what was the vision that you started with and how did it evolve? Walk me through that.
For sure. So I think probably the best is to start with why Web3. I actually got interested in Web3 from another marketing leader before I started Safary Club, which began as a community of growth leaders getting to know each other, learning from each other. I was actually doing that same type of thing in Web2. I would reach out to Web2 marketers that were sort of like 5 years ahead of me in my career to try and understand the next steps and what I needed to do to get there. And one of those people that I spoke with was named Whitney Steele. She was at a similar marketplace to me. She was at Thumbtack, which is like a home goods services marketplace. And this was like summer 2021. She was like, yeah, I'm thinking about this thing, Web3. And I was like, Whitney, isn't like Web3 like so far off from now? Like, is that gonna be a thing? And she was like, I think it'll like take place like sooner than you think, Justin. And then like fast forward from that conversation, basically 4 months, I became a founder in crypto. She became the VP of marketing at OpenSea. It really was like, sometimes when you get exposed to a new space or new ideas from somebody that you respect deeply, it starts to shift your mind in that direction. And so clearly we didn't have a conversation in those 4 months, but we both found ourselves more and more exposed to the exciting nature of Web3. When we first got into the crypto space, we're still very interested in hiring. My background is in marketplaces, different types of hiring marketplaces. So you mentioned the YC one, which was a mock interview tool turned marketplace for hiring software engineers. Then I went over to this company, Winolo, which was it's basically for Uber for warehouse workers, so like a staffing marketplace. And so I've been really interested by how to hire people, how to vet people, onboard people, human coordination. And when we got into crypto, the obvious way to do that was through DAOs. So that's actually how we got our start. We built a DAO tool to sort of improve human coordination for these different DAOs, help them manage their different processes. And I, as the marketer, had to take this DAO tool to market. And for those that were around during that time, this was really the height of the DAO tooling market. This was like, the DAO tooling market was kind of like a 2-month bubble that like came crashing up and crashing down. And we, unbeknownst to us, were almost towards the crashing down part of the market when we took this tool to market. But when I went around to all these different DAO leaders, I was basically like, hey, we created this great tool. Like, do you want to use it? And they're all like, who else is using it? And I was like, nobody, you're going to be the first. And they're like, cool, bye. So Safary Club, the community actually arose from that, was me saying, Safari, like I can create this other community. And then that community that we create can use the tool inside of it. And then that will be the first community that uses our tool. So we always knew that we wanted to build something in software from the start. It just became more clear what that was going to be. But lo and behold, what took place for us was that we started using our tool in Safari's community as it got started. And we were like, this tool really sucks, like actually, that we built. But at the same time, everyone was like craving this like Web3 growth community and wanted to be a part of it. So we kind of did the very Web3 thing of 2021 and said like, we're going to ditch the tool and tool building for now, and we're going to go all in on the community and see where that takes us. And so that was very much like the first year plus of Safary was being all in on the community before we started building software again.
So you basically decided to abandon product and build community. What was going like? What was the conversation? What were you telling your team? Like, okay, we've spent a year or so, or maybe even more time building up to this idea, right? And we launched it. We gave it like some people used it, and now we're going to abandon that for essentially what's considered an afterthought for most founders, right? A community, having a community. Okay, yeah, I have a community. It's cool. Okay, amazing. And you said, okay, this product can go towards community building, and obviously it shaped up the way it did. But what was the conversation like when you spoke to your team members at the time, and when you were growing your team? What were you telling them? Like, hey, yeah, we're just a community where people hang out, and we're gonna make money somehow.
Yeah. I mean, I think that fortunately or unfortunately, we hadn't raised before that point in time. So Safary, when we built this DAO tool, was just me and my co-founder. My co-founder built the tool and I was the one that was supposed to take it to market. So when we quickly realized that that wasn't going to work out, we didn't have to convince anyone. It was just plainly obvious to us that we needed to go into a new direction, and that seems like the thing to do. Communities, especially, back in 2021, were all the rage. There was like FWB, which like raised like millions of dollars from A16Z. So like for us, I think it was like somebody is going to maybe be interested in this community at some point in time, and then we'll be able to build what we ultimately want to build. But yeah, that was the early journey for us, is that we actually bootstrapped the first like 15, 16 months of Safary ourselves, just me and my co-founder. So both the community fully and then the product as well. So yeah.
Now you went into the direction of building the community. Now, eventually, V1 of Safary was also about to come around. Walk me through when you are bootstrapping as a founder. You're concerned about runway. You're concerned about, okay, we don't even have a product yet. Like, where the hell is this company going? There is a ton of uncertainty that somebody's thinking about. I think, well, tooling and just where the tech has progressed, it's probably become slightly easier. But that inner feeling of doubting yourself at every turn never goes away. How did you tackle that mind state? And then how did you break from that and then go towards building We1? Tell me about that.
Yeah. I think that like this is something that I did not realize, as the gap between a first employee and a founder is really this like early journey that you're describing. So when I joined that first company, right, like I thought that I knew what it was like to be a founder because I was like in the trenches, nothing was figured out, like we're, just like going forward. But the reality is that when I was hired at that company, they had been on the journey already for a year and a half as three founders. They raised money. They came up with the idea. They had a direction, right, that they were moving in. Obviously, we didn't have product market fit. There was still a lot that like needed to be figured out, but like, they like had a solid grasp and a like reason to go in a certain direction. When you're a founder before raising money, while you're bootstrapping, I call it like the desert phase. Like you don't know, you're just like wandering around the desert, like looking at different ideas, like hoping that you get to like an oasis that is like, has water, and then like hopefully like is like an ocean, right? Like you hope that you like come out of the desert and find the ocean. But more often than not, like you like find something, it seems promising, then you're like, oh, actually this is just like a well, and like this is all the water that's here, and I got to abandon this and go a different direction. But it is the desert phase is extremely soul crushing, to your earlier point. Constant existential doubt. You like leap onto something that seems promising, and then you build your whole identity around going in that direction, and then you feel like it's not going to work out, and so you go in a different direction. And it's constantly about like, you have to weigh like intellectual honesty, like of, is this direction something that's going to make it, and I just need like more grit and perseverance to like continue in this way, or am I seeing the writing on the wall and I need to go in a different direction? So I think that this like desert phase is by far the most challenging part of building a company, or at least was for me. And how we got through it is that, I was really grateful or thankful that my co-founder was a second time entrepreneur. So he had been through this journey before, sort of was able to really keep me grounded as we went through that phase, because I think that, where I excel is when there's, like, I call it like the jungle phase, which is the next phase. Like, you're going through the jungle, you're like trying to go in a certain direction, you're like hacking weeds, like you're figuring it all out. I'm like great for like the jungle phase, but like the desert phase was really, really hard for me to live in, like that much uncertainty, that much ambiguity. I think is takes a really certain type of person that is very comfortable in that complete unknown space. And so, yeah, I think that you need somebody like my co-founder that just has been there before, and could sit with that and say, like, this is the way that we're going to go. And if it's not the right way, we go in another direction.
Is that how the Safari logo came to be? Lion in the jungle?
No, actually, it's funny, like when you start a company and, you come up with all these visions for different companies, you come up with different branding. So it's kind of funny that, like, I don't even know where the wild wilderness came from. That was just like the branding that we got stuck with because Safari took off so quickly. You know what I mean? It's really like a people wanted this thing immediately. It was just like an obvious gap in the market that I saw. Also, lots of basically everyone who identified as a marketer at that time was like, yes, we need this immediately. Let us in.
And was the idea just to sort of conglomerate marketers within within a space? Obviously, you did a lot of events earlier on. That's how you sort of scaled up from there. Was the idea just that, or obviously it's drastically different to where Safari is now? Were some of those early seeds in there at that point in time? If yes, then how did you go from let's conglomerate marketers to do events to now we're actually going to teach them and we're going to brainstorm, we're going to do all of this together? How did that arc begin?
Yeah, Safari's community actually is very similar today as it was 3.5 years ago. So I always like to think marketing in general is kind of a reaction to whatever is happening in that moment. Like the best like shifts are like everyone's doing it this way, we're going to do it that way, this way, that way. So like at the time, community meant really large Discord server that was open, crazy text based, and just like kind of a mess. And so I was like, Safari is going to be closed, curated, audio based, right? So like the opposite of all those things. Audio based is actually a really interesting one. I feel like we like lucked into that because for me, I was like, I'm one person. I don't have like 15 moderators from around the world that can like manage this thing. I don't have the resources to do that. So like whatever community I create has to be something that like only I need to be able to run, like with some of my time, not all of my time. And so as a result of that, audio is just like a much easier format. Instead of like text all the time, 24/7, it's like Tuesdays, 9 a.m. PT this time. That's the way that you engage in our community. If you're not around that time, fine. But like, don't expect that the Discord server is going to be like running 24/7 and that I have to manage that. So it's also about setting expectations for what it means to engage in a community that I think a lot of other people missed. So that was really the core of it. But the idea, I'd say, of Safari's community was that, or my hot take at the time was that Web3 growth leaders would ultimately determine the success of crypto. That was like sort of like my core contrarian belief, which I still say is like probably pretty contrarian 3.5 years later, but is a little bit less contrarian now. And so my idea was if we get all these growth leaders together to share their ideas and tactics with each other in real time, that will basically help us ensure that we can grow the pie together. And 2021 was a very collaborative time in crypto's history, which is what attracted me to the space. And it feels like a lot of the wider space has regressed since then, but we've still been able to maintain this very like collaborative, open, Acme style like culture in Safari Club's community, which I think is why people are even more attracted to Safari Club in 2025 than they were in 2021, because it's basically the type of vibes that a lot of people miss from when they got into crypto.
It's also become, and I'm sure you probably know this too. It's almost like a data symbol now. It's like a badge of honor that yes, if I've been a Safari Club member, yeah, I definitely have an edge over other people that don't have it because of the network
Absolutely.
effects and obviously the insights that come from that. I wanted to understand, like, in terms of sort of compiling the meta together, right? You're bringing in really smart marketers who have tackled different marketing problems from different perspectives. When you're doing all of this, if this was a Web 2 marketing community, well, meta does not change. You have your defined channels, you have your defined strategies, you take it and you copy paste it. Amazing, lovely. Crypto, that's absolutely not the case, which is where I think a lot of the sort of the strength of the community really, I think, played in for Safari. What I did want to know is when you as a steward are guiding the community forward, not just maintaining it, retaining it, and sort of sharing, cross-pollinating knowledge with each other, but also when you're trying to grow the community and you're trying to reach out to more people. What was like an unconventional strategy or like let's say messaging or branding or communication, something that you did extremely differently other than maybe, some of the things you've talked about to really convince the top tier marketers this is going to be a huge value add, not just for you, but for your future as well, because you're also going to be working with marketers at a certain point in time, and you can be a part of that journey. What was the conversation you were having with them? Because I remember at that time, a lot of people were actually coming over from Web 2 into Web 3, right? And becoming marketers, especially at senior roles. So what was your conversation with them like? What did you tell them?
Yeah. So I think that this is another aspect that I was fortunate for building a strong community where I think other community leaders and teams failed is that I was basically just creating a community for me, right? Like I was the target audience of this community versus a lot of, community leaders get brought in to lead a community of people that are not like them, right? Or that are not that similar to them, or that it doesn't have a strong identity, or they want to use the community for an acquisition channel and not like build an authentic community. But as a result of that, like of building a community for me, like I knew what I was looking for in a community, and I talked to other growth leaders to validate whether they were looking for the same type of thing. And not saying like this is going to be a thing and I'm going to create this. And more so like, what do you think? Like keeping it very open. And I came across one guy who was the head of growth at Ledger at the time, Ludo Simon, who basically said to me, I have the idea for the same thing. Like, I think that a Web3 growth community should be created. I've been thinking about this a lot. And I said, like, Ludo, I have this whole idea for what Safary Club could look like. Why don't I send that to you? And if you like it, you can join mine. And if you don't like it, feel free to, create your own. Because in my head, I was thinking to myself, what it sounds like you're thinking as well, as I was like, if this like really top tier growth leader starts this community, I, as like a complete nobody, my community is not going to take off, right? And so I basically spent like a day, like that was kind of a bluff. Like I hadn't thought about this deeply. Like I had thought about it, but I did not have initial vision. I basically spent a day like building out what the vision of Safari was going to look like, sent it to Ludo, and he was like, great, I'll be your first community member. And so things kind of like took off from there. I think it was very helpful to have Ludo as like an initial community member. I think that helped attract other, tier one marketers. So our first batch was very like tier one. Like I remember looking through the applications with my co-founder and we were just like, what the hell? Like everyone's way more legit than we are. Like we're complete nobodies. Like what's up with this? Because we got like, Ludo, we got like Sean Hang, who is the VP of growth at CoinMarketCap into this first batch, like many just like very sophisticated growth leaders who went on to do amazing things in the years to come, who were just so enthralled to be part of this hive mind of marketers. So yeah, that was a little bit about the early journey. So I'd say like in conclusion, it's not that we did anything special per se or like unique growth tactic. It was just like we really knew the customer that we were serving, which was obvious because I was the customer that we were serving.
It's funny how I do these podcasts and like always it's the simple solutions that prevail. And the funny thing is
Absolutely.
the obvious dimwit answer, left curve answer is always the right curve answer also. So and people are not really paying attention to that because they feel like there's some magic potion, some growth hack, some strategy that really skills them. And most of the times that's not the case. Really interesting. Okay. So we talked about a lot of the early journey. Now, you started in 21, correct?
Very end of
Now,
2021.
22 also happened, and then subsequently 23 happened. I think, at least for as long as I've been in crypto, that's the worst bear market I have ever seen, and the amount of turmoil that was coming into the picture. At that time, one, I really want to know what were marketers talking about, or what were their concerns. Two, I want to know, I think this was the early stages of V1 as well, right? Which is when you started building out and sort of experimenting with Safary V1. What was that experience like? How did you orient the team? How did you orient the community? What were the kind of conversations happening in them? How were people sort of positioning themselves almost in a way that allows for longer term success in a time where everybody thinks crypto is dead? Although I think you can talk somebody's ear off with that line, but it definitely did feel pretty huge because we, I think, so publicly hadn't seen something in the past. Obviously, hacks happen, stuff happened in the past, but not this publicly. Tell me about that time.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. For those that are listening, when we first got in November 2021, that was like the peak of the bull market. And when we launched the first batch of Safary was February 2022, which was kind of the beginning of the bear, but people didn't really know that at the time. And so it's actually, I think, the perfect time to start a community of savvy growth leaders, because what was on their mind at that time was they knew that things had been growing like crazy, but they also knew that the music was about to stop, or that was, some things were the sort of like free money machine was stopping, and they needed to be able to come up with sustainable growth strategies and pitch those internally so that the companies that they were at could, live to see another day. And so that was really the conversation that was happening for the first, 6 months of 2022 was like, what does the shift towards more sustainable growth strategies look like? And what do we need to put in place to get those things there? There was also a really interesting conversation, especially in 2022, happening around consumer privacy in crypto. There was sort of the meta of privacy is important, it's a right, everyone cares about that. But behind the scenes, founders and marketers were both doing things that were very much not privacy centric in order to grow. So that was sort of
Are
an
are they are
interesting
they are
dichotomy.
they still doing it? Do they
They're
still?
they're
I'm
definitely
pulling your
still
legs.
doing it. Yeah. I
Continue.
mean, it was kind of ironic that it was like, yeah, like, everyone's like privacy this, privacy that, but like everyone had Google Analytics installed on their website, right? So it was these types of sort of like push and pull of like what the top line messaging says is privacy good, centralization bad. What the like actual on the ground said is we're going to install Google Analytics, which is like we're going to give all of our data to the most centralized entity. We're going to collect all this data on our users and so on and so forth. So it was sort of an interesting sort of like shift that we were seeing of people being like, I feel handicapped to grow without it. A lot of teams are doing this. Our team wants to like respect the ethos of Web3, so we're not doing it, but we're also like not growing as much. It's like, like how do I bring this up internally to my team? Like there was a lot of conversations about people wanting to like add a collect email after like the sign up with like wallet, and like being like really on the fence about that. So it was a very interesting time in which some marketers were very much profiting from data driven growth strategies, and others were like totally handicapped at the knees and had nothing. And I think 2022 began to shift a little bit more in the data driven direction as some of these other companies like Safary started to pop up as well that were saying like, all right, as you shift toward from, everything goes up and, spammy things and go towards sustainable marketing, like you need data driven marketing to be sustainable. And so like, we will help you get there. So yeah, that was, I think, a lot of the early conversation of 2022.
Technically speaking, though, when you are developing a product like that, I still remember this was like still early days of things like Zeely and Galaxy, and people were definitely getting more aware about the fact that if I need to store my NFT and buy my crypto and hold my keys and hold my own crypto, I have to do it this way. FTX definitely exacerbated that point, which is where a lot of these platforms started to scale. At that point in time, let's say you figured out attribution was the way to go because you could get deeper insights into like how the customer flow is going around. But technically speaking, how difficult was that? What were the challenges there? How did you tackle those pieces?
Yeah. Attribution was something that we knew was going to be the first most important thing to tackle from the beginning because everything was like really hand wavy before that. Like attribution truly didn't really exist in crypto in 2022. The only teams that had attribution had built it internally, like OpenSea, Uniswap, all the big companies had built marketing attribution internally um, for crypto. It wasn't that difficult to build, but it was more so like it was a problem that a lot of people had, but um, because there wasn't a focus on marketing, because nobody talked about marketing, and a lot of the people who had been doing crypto marketing before 2021 were not Web2 marketers. They like grew up in crypto and like learned marketing on the fly. Like it wasn't really a thing, right? And so us, I'd say it was like unique timing of like I had a Web2 marketing background. I knew a lot about attribution. I'd seen this story before, could come up with and conceive of an attribution system that made sense to create in Web3. But I think that there's another caveat here that I learned as well over time is that attribution is something that all marketers know about, but actually very few Web2 marketers had to set up themselves. So they didn't know it in a deep enough way. So really the only types of marketers that I saw that had deep experience with attribution from coming from a Web2 standpoint were either extremely early in their company and thus they were the first marketer and had to do it themselves, or they're from a really large company that was running multiple attribution models at the same time and really had to like parse through that data. But everyone in the middle basically used systems like Google Ads, other things, the different channels that they're operating on that had Google Analytics under the hood, but they didn't have to set it up or understand how it was created. And so that was an interesting insight that I came to as well, is that by working as the first hire at an early stage startup, and then even at a later stage startup, a Series C startup, was the person that had to set up attribution for the first time again and again, but a lot of marketers didn't have that understanding or know-how. So we've also had to do a lot of market education around that, how to set up custom events, how to architect your funnel, a lot of these things that Web2 marketers at, say, seed to Series A startups had to do, but most people in crypto haven't done before. So I think that we have been on a long education journey as well for teaching the market how to do data-driven analytics.
Did you already have this in mind when you were building out the community? Because the kind of product that we want to build will definitely need a lot of handholding. And the approach will be, instead of sort of building the product and going out there looking for customers, you do it the other way around. You already set up customers and then you execute on that. Was that already there? Or was that something you realized as you were going around?
Yeah, we had very strongly validated that like attribution was desperately needed in the crypto through the community. And a lot of people were like, yeah, it's only a matter of time before somebody builds this. We need this now. If only my team had it. It was obvious that from the very beginning, back in February 2022, that was going to be a thing that needed to be built. But actually, the first thing that we built was not attribution. We basically we really were inspired by Dune having like open and collaborative data dashboards and making companies transparent. But we thought that they were missing a core element, which is marketing, right? Like on-chain data is not marketing data for the most part, right? It's like transaction data, revenue data. And a lot of what we saw, Twitter then was like very much gamed, still the case now. Everything on chain we were seeing was like also had a lot of potential to be gamed, but our core understanding was like when you mix off chain and on chain data together through attribution or other things, the story becomes very difficult to like game that joint story, right? You can game one side, you can game the other side, but when you put the two together, it becomes clear what's happening. So attribution was going to be a core of that business, but our idea was basically like we want to build like a open version of Mixpanel. So instead of collaborating and building out dashboards for your team, from a marketing point of view, the entire community would be able to see these dashboards. And this would be a mix of both public data on chain and private data off chain. And basically companies would submit link up their private data to Safari and display that so that companies could really see what was really going on. And we rolled this out within Safary Club. So Safary Club really became like a place for us to test products and different ideas. And so we got a bunch of like, probably we had like 20, 25 projects within the Safari community that were connecting their Discord data and they were doing attribution. So we could see the on-chain, off-chain combination. And then it was like kind of social. People would be able to like comment on each other's charts, being like, hey, I see this like growth inflection point here. Like what happened? And then the growth leader would be like, this is the campaign that we did at that point in time that caused this spike. So it was a really interesting experiment. Ultimately, VCs didn't believe that we were going to be able to get more than, sort of like that we were going to be able to scale the trust that we created in Safari to have people connect their private data and like comment on charts and do all that. And so like that idea kind of like sunset there because we couldn't like really build it out beyond that without VC funding of some kind. And that's where the sort of like core attribution idea came in. But I'm still a strong believer that that would be, or some element of that is still a vision that I think is necessary for us to bring to crypto. And I don't know what form it'll take, but it's something that I believe really strongly. We need a way to show people publicly metrics that are very difficult to game and are difficult to game because of the cross section between their private first party data often tells the true story that their public data does not. And we see that every time people connect their script to our script to their website, connect their Twitter accounts, sort of like the aha moment comes that we can be like, yeah, this is a real project or this is not a real project.
I'm really fascinated by that because you specifically mentioned about tooling companies that were coming up. I remember at the time there were a few other tooling companies that were also coming up to solve different aspects of touching very lightly upon this problem from like different angles, especially when it comes to just better analytics into what's really happening. I wanted to know from you is having built a community that was so solid, that was so strong at the time, and all of your competition at the time, or most of your competition at the time, had a token for their community to hold and trade and do all that stuff. And you could have taken VC money, you could have scaled it much faster, much quicker. Obviously, your motivations were not aligned with that, and thank God it wasn't. But was this something that people told you? Yeah, you should do this, and this is valuable because I know that thing has still not changed. I still feel like we evolved from community tokens to influencer tokens to meme tokens and whatever shape it takes going forward. It's always going to be there where if you have influence over people, launch a token and then scale from there. What has been your understanding or learning from not just yourselves, but also other marketers that run their own communities on
Yeah.
this? I want to know your pet peeve.
It's tricky because I think in an ideal world, we always sort of love to monetize the community in some kind of way, like directly to like become a sustainable business model. But I think that like truthfully, the reason why DAOs failed is because they weren't able to do that. And if you think about like, if you provide, oftentimes the smallest communities are the ones that provide the most value. So Safari, we do cohorts of 80 people for Safary Club. How much money do you need to get from these 80 people to like have a sustainable business model? Like the unit economics just don't math, right? Like if we think about like one person in the US, me running Safary Club, we'd probably need like $1,500 per person, right? Per year. And that just gives you one full-time person. And so like that was just never going to work out. And so like we had to think about like why the community is important in its own right. And I think that the truth is, and I've like joked about this on other podcasts before, like if I was not the founder and I was working for somebody and running Safari Club's community, like the founder definitely would have fired me like a long time ago because like I think the community is very much a leap of faith growth channel. You have to believe that this group of people and what you're creating is valuable, and it's very difficult to show metrics to prove that that is the case. And I think like over time I've developed a belief that community, like the only KPI that actually matters in a community is, do people join your community and meet at least one other person that they liked, right? That they didn't know before. And I think like I'm not even talking about crypto communities, like all communities ever. Like that's the only thing that matters. Why do you join a church group? Why do you like join a like basketball group? Like you want to meet other people and you want to meet other people that you like. And if your community fails to introduce you to like one net new person that you like, then you've completely failed as a community builder. And a lot of these DAOs and Discord communities did not succeed at that very basic premise of like, joined this group and I met new people. So I think that is the tricky thing, and laying on all these incentives to get people to join community just like distorts that core value prop of like, I came to this place and I met a cool person and, now we're friends for life.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think we've covered a lot of ground around Safari. Definitely a lot of nuggets over there. One thing that I did want to know from you is you tweeted about this, and I think generally the industry is understanding the same thing, that the go-to-market playbook has shifted from vanity metrics to something more tangible like smart followers mindshare to now people actually caring about revenue, which should have been the case from the beginning, but they now started to care about it. I wanted to know, like, if there is a founder in the crypto space right now who is like, okay, I want to focus on revenue and I want to orient my team, my product, and my engineering in such a way where I am thinking about revenue from a first principles perspective, rather than thinking about, okay, like I'm going to launch sort of a product, put it on like testnet, launch a token, launch NFTs around that, and then incentivize a huge wave around me. How you, how are you seeing this evolution? Because you've always been narrowly focused on, okay, no, this Web 2 perspective of no, go talk to users, go understand what their pain points are, go test and experiment your product, which with the actual people who will need it at the end of the day. So talk me through some of those first principles thinking. How do you feel like it's evolving? What should people do, even if it's an obvious answer that somebody needs to be hit on the head with? Yeah, I would love to know, like, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think that some of the like cracks that are forming for why this is happening now is that a lot of founders, they would pitch something to VCs, and I feel like crypto VCs like love the crazier the better. I mean, normal VCs love crazier the better as well, but like to an extreme. Like I just remember talking to like two VCs about this idea. They were like, yeah, like so like this deep in project is going to like fund all this infrastructure that's going to go into space and all these things. And I was like, my mind, I'm like, this is the crazy fucking idea I've ever heard. Right? And then like they were the other idea, they were like, yeah, I love it, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's doesn't seem like that's gonna work. Like, that's crazy. And they're like, what? No, Justin, like we're both invested. Like we're both investing in their rounds. And I was just like, this is madness, right? Like this is the stuff that gets crypto VCs excited. Audience first, like building something that people want, that people are going to be able to use in the short term is not something that crypto VCs like to invest in. So I think that like what founders need to think about is like founders are like pitching crazy stuff, and then even there are things that are like less crazy but like have real world use cases potentially, they don't modify their messaging to then shift to users. They basically stay in this crazy land. And I think that the crazy same things that are like crazy that VCs like are also the same things that work well for a TGE but don't work well for building a business. So if you are going to raise VC money, I think that as a founder, you have to get the money and then pivot your messaging to like, what are the users of this like world that I live in, whatever, even if it's like space, a space, whatever, like who are the space enthusiasts that are going to like fund this decentralized infrastructure and satellites in space, but like to go like talk to those people, because like basically what happens, right? You raise a bunch of money, you don't pivot your messaging, you go off into La La Land for 2 years, build something, and then your VC say, hey guys, it's TGE time, like get those users. And then they're like, what users? Oh, like they're my users who are the space enthusiasts, but the people who are going to buy my token are all these degens. And so I got to say like, sorry, space enthusiasts, we'll come back to you later, and go for this ragtag audience of crazy people that, everyone else goes for. So I think that the good news in crypto is that playbook is like shattering, right? Like that playbook works really well when number go up after TGE. But since all the TGE's number has gone down in the past like 18 months, with like the very few exception, I just did like a video about this for the Safari certification. Like of all the TGEs I found, Hyperliquid is the only one that went up. Like that started up and kept going up. Pengu also started going up and went up. Story Protocol went up, stayed up. We'll see if it still stays up after the last week. But like those are the three, right? We're talking about hundreds to thousands of TGs in the last year or three that number went up. And given that, people are going to have to find a new solution. I think that that's where the revenue meta is coming back strong. Is like people like, one, the scammy playbook doesn't work anymore, boo-hoo. And two, people are just tired of seeing all these like companies raise millions of dollars and then make like $40 on their chain. And a lot of builders who are legitimate builders are frustrated because they have a lot harder time raising money and have a lot more traction than a lot of these companies. So I think that that's really what's spurring the revenue meta now. And, I'm definitely trying to push this as well because it doesn't serve the space to have companies that don't have any fundamentals. It doesn't serve like me as a company to have because our customers, right, we are trying to serve revenue generating companies. If they don't, it's a lot easier to like buy a marketing attribution tool or a customer data platform when you could be like, when we implement this, then number goes up on our growth metrics and that is meaningful to us because our business survives, rather than like, that's just the like fun thing of the day and it has no effect on our business because we don't have any revenue and we never will. So that was a long tirade to say like that
No,
the meta is changing. We need to get back to fundamentals. That's good for us. That's good for everyone. And hopefully it stays that way.
yeah, no, definitely. I also think like a lot of that was also just a money printer going around. So there was like a ton of liquidity in the market to play around with. So if that's where the crazier you get, the better it is for VCs to get that dopamine hit. Obviously, retail by extension to get that. I love the example of bait and switch people. You start with space and then get into maybe renewable energy or something like that. That's amazing. And also, one other thing I'm curious about, and I promise this is the last marketing question I'm going to ask you, but the expectation, because I think if you look at it not just from like a marketing perspective and a founder perspective, but also the other stakeholders that are involved in the process, whether that's VCs, market makers, exchanges. Let's take them, for example. Now, for them, a certain amount of engagement, a certain amount of followers, a certain amount of activity happening around your brand is what will get your token listed on an exchange, right? So you're always tackling with this problem of, okay, I don't want a botted account and like with 200K followers, but 2K views or less on my posts. But I also cannot risk, losing out on a Bybit listing or a Binance listing, so on and so forth. And while the meta is shifting to, okay, be more realistic about your ideas and go back to first principles, how do you think these stakeholder, is there going to be like a readjustment in expectations? Like, yeah, 10K followers is a lot and that's actually good enough to push you forward? Or are they, yeah, like what kind of, how will their perspective change? Are
Yeah.
they just a victim of the system?
I think that they're a victim of the system, but also that they, in many ways, have earned their place in the system. Like if we think about distribution as a whole, if all the protocols in crypto are fighting over the same group of users and their North Star is how do I get listed on Binance or Bybit, etc., that tells you one thing very clearly, which is that the only companies in the space that are acquiring net new users are centralized exchanges, right? It's basically like they're the distribution layer for the entirety of crypto. And that, in my opinion, is where a lot of the problem begins, right? When you're the space protocol and you're like, I'm just going to rely on Binance for our future distribution instead of like trying to get net new space users to get excited about, crypto and move them into the space. That's where you set up this like inherent distribution challenge. So what I think will happen is like at the end of the day, what exchanges want is to also use these smaller protocols as a distribution layer, right? And so they're trying to find the ways that they can see for this new protocol that wants to launch their token on our chain, are they going to bring us net new users or not? And if not, are they going to pay us a stupid amount of money for distribution and access to our users? And it doesn't have to be like no one's going to have more users than a centralized exchange, but it's like, do you have valuable net new users that you add to our ecosystem, yes or no? So I think on one hand, like the botting, I think these exchanges are getting more savvy as well to like know like, are you actually bringing us new users, or do you just like have a botted Twitter account and like botted, activity coming from Southeast Asia? Like, what does that look like? So one, I think that also is going to break as these centralized exchanges get more data driven. But two, it's great that centralized exchanges are the only ones that have marketing teams in crypto, but we have to stop relying on them to do top of funnel for the entire industry. And that's what I also hope, that as these companies focus on revenue more, they will naturally have to go to their audience directly. Some of their audience is not going to be in crypto, especially those that have crazier ideas, and they're going to have to onboard those people into crypto. And so if they do that, then the space grows overall. But yeah, I think that a central problem is that we can't rely on the centralized exchanges to do growth for the entire industry.
Yeah, no, 100%. I, which leads me perfectly to my next question, which was now with V2 of Safari, obviously you've taken a lot of these learnings into that. Now, what is your perception of, hey, this is the play we're evolving Safari into? Why did you do that? How did you do that? And where do you believe that this vision goes further down the road?
Yeah, we're in an interesting space both for crypto growth, but also for marketing overall. What we see in marketing overall is that every marketing channel is saturated that exists on the internet today. Andrew Chen, who's like one of the gods of like Web2 growth, wrote this like really super popular essay like 4 months ago called "Every Marketing Channel Sucks Right Now." And I don't need to tell you what the article is about to tell you that that is what Web2 marketers are feeling. Web3 marketers are feeling that to a lesser degree as well. We have much fewer channels that we rely on in crypto, so it doesn't seem as big of a problem. But in the larger marketing landscape, things are changing a lot, right? And this is because consumer privacy has basically been like slowly killing the ad engine every year. So like costs are being driven up. AI, ChatGPT is now killing like search, SEO. So like a lot of things are changing with like the ability to get distribution. And at the same time, AI is making it easier than ever to build products. So you have the distribution challenge is just becoming more and more difficult, right? You have way more products and distribution is harder than ever. And then, so there's competition and all this is like creating a challenge. I feel like we haven't truly seen the effect of that in crypto yet, of like people are not vibe coding products to be used by crypto users the same way that they are for everything in Web 2, but it will come for us as well. And I think that builders in crypto have a reckoning that's gonna come for that. In terms of what this changes and why, what this means for the way that Safari thinks about our product is, in a post AI world, I think the relationships become more important than ever. We see that sort of like AI is helping us produce content faster than ever, experiences faster than ever. I think that all of these things lead me to believe that community and relationships are going to be the two dominant growth strategies that ultimately win out in both B2B and B2C contexts. And these things will rise even more than they already have. So we are fully ready for this community relationship swing back. And what that means on a platform level is that we've actually adopted our internal platforming to be built all around relationship intelligence. That's the new thing that we've been building for the past several months. So one thing that we like did as a very early first thing is we indexed everyone's Twitter followers and started showing connections between different people. So like basically like applying LinkedIn logic to Twitter to see, where do people work? Do people from important companies follow you in your ICP? Yes or no? If you're targeting founders, do founders follow you? And so on and so forth. And we're basically trying to make networks searchable, contextual, and actionable, because we think that where the future of marketing is going is shifting more towards following people, which we already see, like team-led marketing, building in public, et cetera, and that people will be the individual content engines for the companies that they serve. So like right now, you direct traffic to your website, the funnel happens on your website. We think in the future, the funnel will happen within people's actual personal Twitter accounts or whatever platform they're on. So if you're, a brand that has developer tools, other products, et cetera, you're going to have different people at your company that focus and talk about certain things, and the funnel will happen directly within those people's accounts, and then they will reach out to and be reached out to by opportunities. And we'll do that at scale with relationship intelligence. So that's a little teaser to where we think that the world is heading, that as AI helps us scale output of creativity, that thing that will never be able to be scaled is the relationships that we have between real people, but we'll be able to scale the messaging and access to those relationships across teams.
So, breaking news, guys, Justin is building the new Facebook. So, who to call to invest in the next round, because Safari also raised recently, which is amazing. Okay, two very quickly final questions that I also have that relate to our conversation. One is about, so we have all of these different social platforms and what I call essentially, let's say, data centers at the core of it, right? Whether that's a social platform, a intelligence platform, so on and so forth. So Web 2 up until now was built upon platform place, marketplace plays, platform plays, so on and so forth. Now with the way the world is headed, it more so feels like it's rather going to be a person having an intent and then getting a sort of tailor-made personalized outcome for that specific person. Now, what I mean by that is the moat of owning your network will become less and less important from a platform sort of data ownership perspective. And it more goes towards the more accessible you can make your data. That actually is the way you survive in an AI first future. And the more searchable it becomes, the easier to distribute it becomes, the better your chances of winning in the future. So we've sort of flipped the moat over there, which is also interesting because that's where I think the privacy play and decentralization of data really plays into the picture. So maybe Web3 has a play there. But what I wanted to know from you is, do you also perceive it to be the same way where platforms go from let's close our network and completely own it to okay, no, let's open our network because we don't really know where people are coming from, because first it was Google search, which was the distribution platform. Now it can be anything, because it could be a tiny tool you don't know about, but is really good at looking for prospects, like let's say a Clado, for example, really good at looking for leads. And these leads can be from anywhere, not just maybe it is a LinkedIn right now, but obviously it's going to expand further beyond that. So for these platforms, it becomes really important to do so. With the way you are also perceiving a similar kind of a problem, where do you see this evolving? Will LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram platforms like these close their doors? Or do you feel like they'll open their doors and then they'll give like a pathway for people to leverage it?
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting essay that I read recently on this by Brian Balfour, who's the founder of Reforge, which is like another company that we get a lot of inspiration from the Web 2 world. It's like they basically taught all the Web 2 marketers how to do growth over the past decade. He believes, and I believe in his thesis, that all social media platforms have essentially gone from open to closed and monetized in some period of time, and that he doesn't see that changing. I think that like we see the same in crypto. It's like platforms can afford to be open for a time, but depending on if you're set up on the public company path, public companies that go and IPO, like their shareholders want to see that they continue to make more money over time. I think that some, protocols in crypto have potential for being a different business model, that they're not trying to max extract over the long term and can stay open. But I think that there is a question of what are the underlying fund incentives that make that so. And one of the interesting things about his thesis is that he talks about how this is actually accelerated over time, depending on the different platforms. So he talks about how like Google was very open for like 15 years, and then they started to like shut down and close and monetize deeply once people had adopted the platform and it become sort of like ubiquitous to like how people use the internet. He talks about how Facebook did it around like 5 years. And he said like LinkedIn basically did it in like 2 years. So like they like got all these creators to start posting on the platform in like 2022, and like now it's like a shutdown thing. They have like creator like basically creator ads, and like you don't get organic reach on the platform anymore. So I think that that is a big thing that I think will continue to be the case, is like once you get distribution and you lock that distribution, then you deeply monetize and you are very closed. Like we can think about this in our world with the centralized exchanges, right? They own distribution. They are extremely closed. You pay them or they list you because they think that you're a popular project already. So I think that when you own the distribution, you own everything. I think that will become increasingly true. I think the question is, will we see a player that is able to reach massive distribution scale that continues to believe that it makes sense to be open? Different companies have taken different approaches to this. Twitter is actually like fairly open in terms of how it like lets its data be used through its API. The only challenge, the compromise that they make is it's just crazy expensive. So like it's around $42,000 a month to use their API, which is insane. LinkedIn is the opposite. They're like, no one gets access to our data. You can't pay us for this. So I think that is the open question that Web3 social has to solve, is how to, you know, whether it can align incentives in a way that it gives fair distribution access to all in a like democratized way, while figuring out a way to monetize in another way that other platforms haven't done. So I think that's the core question that needs to be answered today for social media, whether it'll be open or closed in the future.
Yeah, that's a very insightful take. And honestly, one of the reasons why I asked that question is because I perceive a similar kind of a change happening. And I also feel like these platforms are not going to change within that. But one other aspect that I also keep in my head is right now, a lot of our consumption is produced by people and then consumed by people. So you have a content creator who creates content and people consume it. With the way the world is going, I have a thesis and I would love your take on that. Is either a new type of, let's say, social platform shows up, or let's say a new kind of tool shows up. I don't know what shape it takes, but my perception is that we will go from just consumption of content to interaction with content. Right now, it's only limited to, okay, you can like, you can comment, you can share, you can maybe retweet, or you can remix it, so on and so forth. Remix is an interesting case study, especially when you look at the data of how many people have started to do that. But my assumption is that with AI and with how easy it is to build something that is not just consumable, but interactable, and then the opportunity that exists over there for any kind of a player to essentially adopt that and receive massive scale is sitting right there. Do you feel like this shift will happen, or like, do you feel like, there is only a certain segment of people that are going to be interested in that? Most people just want to take brain rot of Instagram reels and TikToks into their head.
I think that ideally, yes. I think that there will be a lot of people that want to remix content in some kind of way and can do so much more easily with AI than they ever would have been able to before. But I think that the question then becomes like, as that gets scaled, then what next? Does it like pollute our brains that we're tired of seeing the same type of thing over and over, or not? I mean, if we think about this in a very simple way, we already kind of see this on crypto Twitter. Like somebody will post like with the whole like copy pasta sort of meta, right? That's just like a very like low light version of remixing in terms of like copying the same first paragraph and then making their own twist on it. And so I think that is something humans just naturally like to do, right? You know where the original ownership generally came from, but now you've spun it in your own way. So I definitely see that will proliferate over time for sure in more creative mediums as AI makes it easier for us to do that.
Yeah. Do you also feel like the way we look at apps right now will also change? Where right now, the way we think about apps is, okay, iOS, Android app on the App Store or Play Store. So, okay, the way we look at Play Store also changes, because now building an app is as easy as you describing something, and the better you can describe it, the better kind of interaction you can have with it. And then distribution, rather than being owned by the apps themselves, is actually owned by the aggregator of those apps, where they actually define how your interaction with production from different parties is happening. The reason why I asked that is just, if you actually go to Gemini today and you describe a product or you describe some concept, right? Whether that's educational, so on and so forth, you describe it, it builds a website around it that you can interact with, right? And it's like instant. If this proliferates, then this goes to an extent where now we're not consuming, let's say we're not only consuming like video content, but rather now we have a different sort of a medium of interaction where it's more based on, yeah, like here's an interesting educational concept that I learned about. Here's an app that you can try within the platform and sort of take the learning from that. And now engagement goes from just simply liking or sharing it to you playing around with the thing. It goes almost like a mini game almost. And then there's a bunch of mini games. So
Yeah.
interesting.
I think it goes back to what we were talking about with the social platform discussion. At a certain point, we need to figure out whether the web will be open or whether the web will be closed. Right now, the web is fairly on the closed side of things, and AI makes it theoretically possible, right, for us to draw information like with Gemini and others, like from all the different apps that we use. And obviously that's easier with certain AIs that like own all the applications you use with like Google Calendar, Gmail, etc., and can run AI across them to create your own experiences. So you don't have to use the underlying apps if you don't want to. But I think that there has to be incentives there that make that worth doing. It's interesting even from like our standpoint, right, with our products around like social relationship intelligence. Like you might wonder why when you ask ChatGPT, like, like what is the best article or post on blank topic, right? You're just going to get from the same sources. The best post is probably on Twitter, but you're not going to see any Twitter data or LinkedIn data, even though that's public, coming through ChatGPT because of how the relationship between those two companies is. And so I think that that's the question that ultimately we need to solve, because if we do move towards an open internet, then I think that things do get truly powerful with ChatGPT. If ChatGPT can truly search the internet and does not just search the internet from certain sources that it has access to, and AI can totally actually go across the web as we know it, then I think truly powerful things can get built. But AI, I think, is capped by this sort of closed internet that we live within today.
Yeah, AI is having problems that Web3 used to have. It's
Yes,
interesting.
exactly.
Okay, I know we have to wrap up, although I have like a million questions I can get into. What is something that keeps you up at night? What's something that you think about very deeply that isn't necessarily related to the work that you do or the people that you interact with? But like, what's a maybe like let's say a personal incident, an anecdote, a story, something that you think very deeply about that maybe most of the people watching this might not know about you?
I think it's that I have a core belief, which we kind of talked about at the beginning, that marketers will shape crypto. And our product is tied to that belief, right? And so something I think deeply about is how to make marketers successful at any point in time in their journey. And that's changed a lot, right? Like over the years. Like I feel like first it was like being recognized, like a lot of like growth marketers like had never spoken on conference stages, even though they were like legit CMOs for like many years. Like nobody wanted to hear them speak. We like started promoting that with the first Safari Summit, started getting them all these speaking opportunities, and that sort of created a flywheel. I think that the thing, the next thing, the sort of like part we're in now is that marketers still don't have a seat at the table within the companies that they're in. They get the chief marketing officer position, the CMO position, but they're a chief of nothing, basically. Like they don't actually have real power within the organization, and that hurts us all as well. But I also think that like as companies move towards being like real revenue producing companies, that also opens the door for marketers that are truly great to be able to back up the impact that they're having to real metrics that matter to the business. So that's why I think that for me, the thing that keeps me up at night is like how to make marketers successful. And the way that I believe that needs to be done in today's world is like, one, companies need to be real businesses, and two, they need a seat at the table to get there. And we're still working on figuring out all the ways that we can support marketers to achieve both of those goals. But ultimately, for Safari's platform to be, like for our product and our company to be successful, those things need to be true. And so that's why it makes sense from our perspective to sort of build this foundational infrastructure to create an environment where marketers are celebrated for the great work that they're doing. So that will help us all. But those are the questions over time that keep me up at night, because this might seem like an extreme anecdote, but it's like actually very true, is that the biggest source of our churn is not people saying I don't like to use the product. It's their marketer getting laid off. right? Like our POC at the company gets laid off from the company. Like that's our biggest source of churn. So for us, it is very existential that we need to raise and elevate the status of marketers so that people recognize the great work that they're doing and keep them around.
Love that message. I couldn't have found a better way to end officially the longest podcast LPG has ever done. So, Justin, thank you so much for all your insights. And I think different parts of this journey were unknown. So, I'm glad to sort of bring it on stage and get people to know a little bit more about the man, the myth, the legend they see on crypto Twitter. So, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you for everyone who tuned in. See you in the next episode. GM and bye bye.